Did you know that you can legally fly without having a current FAA medical examination? I know it might seem crazy, but if you use Basic Med instead, it is possible. And that can be a huge relief for those of you guys who don't want to go to an aviation medical examiner to get checked out. Because we all know what they do in those examinations. But before you can use Basic Med, there are some things you should know and some restrictions that you really need to know about. So in this video, I'm going to talk about all that. Welcome to Free Pilot Training. I'm Josh. You're probably watching today's video because you're interested in flying without an FAA medical examination. And if you use Basic Med, you don't have to have one. But in this video, we're going to talk about what you need to do if you decide to go that route. You'll find most of the stuff we're discussing today in FAR 6123. But in a nutshell, if you have a valid driver's license and you have previously had a valid FAA medical certificate, you may be eligible for Basic Med.
If you or a loved one does not have stage 4 diabetes, you have a driver's license, and you have a valid medical certificate, you may be eligible for Basic Med. Diabetes.
You're welcome for that. But Wilford Brimley brings up a really good point here. Before you can fly under Basic Med, you have to have had a valid medical certificate at some point before you can exercise these privileges. This could have been a first, second, or third class medical certificate. It doesn't matter which one you had, as long as you had one and it was valid at some point after July 14th, 2006. In addition to that, that previous certificate can be expired, but it cannot have been suspended or revoked. Even if the certificate was issued under a special issuance, that's fine. You can still use Basic Med. Now, if you're a new student pilot, you're probably realizing that you might not be eligible for Basic Med quite yet because you've never had a medical certificate in the past. But you still need to watch this video because these Basic Med questions are super popular on the FAA written exam right now for some reason. Plus, you might also want to use this once your certificate does expire. And for you sport pilots, you're going to be able to use Basic Med to allow you to fly at night and a few other options. So you're going to want to pay attention to this too. Anyway, if you do decide to use Basic Med, there are some restrictions on what you can fly. You'll find these restrictions in FAR 61-113. First of all, you can only fly an aircraft that has a maximum takeoff weight of 12,500 pounds or less. This means that if the airplane is certified to fly at 12,501 pounds, you cannot fly this thing under Basic Med. It doesn't matter if the actual takeoff weight is 12,499 pounds, you have to look at the total weight that it's capable of carrying. Anyway, if the max takeoff weight is 12,501 pounds and you want to fly it, you need to get an actual FAA medical certificate. And actually, you're going to need a type rating to fly this anyway, so I think this is a good rule. Next, under Basic Med, you can only have up to 7 occupants in the airplane, and this includes the pilot. It's not 7 passengers and then the pilot, it's a total of 7 people in the entire aircraft. In addition to that, you cannot fly an aircraft that's certified with more than 7 seats. If it has 8 seats, you can't just take one of them out. It has to be certified with 7 seats or less. See, I knew what you was thinking. You thought you were going to be able to get one of them Cessna Caravans and pull all but 7 seats out of that airplane. Anyway, enough of that. Let's take a look at a few more limitations you'll need to follow if you operate under Basic Med. In addition to this other stuff, you cannot operate above 18,000 feet MSL if you're using Basic Med instead of a medical. For those of you who forgot, this is basically Class A airspace. Well, I guess technically Class A starts at exactly 18,000 feet, so I guess technically you could fly in Class A if you're super good at holding your altitude for 1 foot. Please don't, though. Anyway, just remember that you can't fly above 18,000 feet. Oh yeah, and as long as you're IFR rated, you can operate under IFR or VFR with Basic Med. Either one is fine. Next, you cannot fly faster than 250 knots. Now, it doesn't say anywhere in the regs that you can't fly an aircraft that's capable of flying faster than that, but you as the pilot cannot exceed 250 knots if you're flying under Basic Med. That's probably a pretty good rule. Now, another limitation of Basic Med is that you cannot fly outside the US if you're operating under these privileges. Now, I actually do think that there are a couple countries that do allow you to fly under Basic Med, but I have no clue which ones those are. You'll have to do the research on that yourself to find the answer to that. And if someone knows, I would really appreciate you putting that in the comments. Okay, now here's the crazy part about all these restrictions. We know that we can't do any of this stuff right here, but oddly enough, there is nothing in the regs that says you can't fly a multi-engine aircraft, as long as the airplane and you meets all these requirements. So you can fly a multi-engine aircraft as long as you're certificated to do so. Don't tell them I said you could fly a multi-engine without the rating. I know what you're thinking. In addition to that, there's nothing that says you can't operate turbine engines under Basic Med. Don't forget, though, that if you're operating an aircraft with a turbojet engine, you have to have a type rating. But as long as you have that type rating, the type of engine doesn't matter. In addition to that, the horsepower of an engine doesn't matter either. Now, obviously, you've got to have that high performance endorsement in your logbook if you're going to operate an aircraft with an engine that has more than 200 horsepower. But as long as you have that endorsement, you can operate a high performance aircraft under Basic Med. You can even operate a complex aircraft if you want, which means that you can fly an aircraft with retractable landing gear. Just don't forget to extend that gear before you land. Okay, so there are a couple other requirements that you should know about if you're operating under Basic Med, but you kind of have to read between the lines of FAR 6123 and FAR 61113. If you have your commercial pilot certificate and you want to operate under those privileges, you have to have at least a second class medical certificate. I explained this in a little more detail in my last video, but what that means to you is that if you don't have at least a second class medical, you cannot carry people or stuff for hire. So if you're operating under Basic Med, you cannot get paid to carry people and stuff around. Basically, when you're operating under Basic Med, you're limited to private pilot privileges. That's why FAR 61113 applies to us in this case, even if we have a commercial pilot certificate. Well, what does that mean to me? Well, that means we can fly in the furtherance of a business. This would be like an aircraft salesman or something like that. We can share flight expenses with our passengers as well, and we can conduct search operations like the Civil Air Patrol does. Now, here's the crazy part. If you dig more into 6123, you'll see that a flight instructor can also give instruction under Basic Med. The caveat to this is that he still needs to meet all those restrictions we talked about earlier. So your instructor can't give you a checkout in an aircraft with 8 seats. If he's operating under Basic Med, he's limited to 7 seats, 12,500 pounds, 18,000 feet, and 250 knots. Okay, so let's look at a few more requirements for flying under Basic Med. First, you have to have a current and valid U.S. driver's license. The funny thing about Basic Med is that the federal aviation regulations don't actually call it Basic Med. They call it operations requiring a U.S. driver's license. So basically, you're using your driver's license as a medical certificate when you're flying under Basic Med. I guess they figure that if you're healthy enough to operate a car or a truck at high speed, then you're probably healthy enough to operate an aircraft as well. But anyway, what that means to you is that you have to have a current and valid U.S. driver's license. Any state license is good as long as it's valid and not expired. You can't use a license from another country, a passport, or an international driver's license. These won't work. The FAA is trusting your state driver's license medical standards. So apparently, we don't trust a driver's license from other countries. Think about that the next time you're driving overseas. In addition to having a current and valid U.S. driver's license, if you want to operate under Basic Med, then you have to agree to a National Driver Register check. And basically, this is a database where they can track all your speeding tickets, DUIs, and all the driving sins you may have. So if you have something to hide from the FAA, you may just want to get the standard FAA physical. Now, I'm not saying you should hide things from the FAA. I'm just saying, I don't know what I'm saying. Just keep that in mind. If we go back to FAR 61113, we'll find a couple other requirements for operating under Basic Med. First, there are 2 things that you have to carry in your logbook anytime you go fly when you operate under Basic Med. First, you have to have a completed medical examination checklist. Now, it doesn't really say this right here, but this checklist has to be filled out by a state licensed doctor or physician. And they have to give you a medical examination and check all the things listed on this checklist. Once they check you for all the stuff listed here, they'll sign this form and you'll keep it in your logbook showing that you're medically qualified to fly. And that's important to remember as well. Make sure they sign this thing. It's not valid unless they sign it. This examination is what the FAA calls a comprehensive medical examination, or CME. And you have to get a new CME every 48 months, and those are not calendar months. That's just a 48-month period. So if you got the exam done on June 11th, then you have to get another one done by June 11th, 48 months later. But as you can see, this is a pretty good option because you only have to get checked by a doctor every 4 years under Basic Med. Now, you can get this checklist a couple different places. You can find it in the FAA's Advisory Circular 68-1, and if you Google search AC 68-1, it should be one of the first things to pop up. Just make sure you have the most current version of this advisory circular. At the time of this video, we're still on version A for this advisory circular, so just make sure you have the most current version. You can also just go to www.faa.gov and search for Comprehensive Medical Examination, and it should be one of the first things to pop up. I'll just click on this one right here and open it up, and then I'll just print this guy out and take it with me to the doctor when I go get the exam. In addition to the comprehensive medical examination, you have to have one other thing in your logbook. You also have to take a basic med education course every 24 calendar months. And as I've mentioned before, a calendar month just means that your training expires on the last day of the month, 24 months from the date you took the training. So if I took the training on the 4th of July because I don't have a life, it expires on July 31st, 24 months from that date. Now, it's really important to note that this video you're watching doesn't count for this training, unfortunately. But there are a few places where you can get this training and it's usually free. They go into a little bit more detail on the things that you have to know before you can operate under Basic Med. If you search for Basic Med on the FAA's website, it's usually one of the first things to pop up. I'll just click this one right here, and it looks like you can actually get that CME checklist here as well. But down here, it looks like I've got two options for that Basic Med training. I don't know much about this one right here, but I've never been disappointed with an AOPA course, so I recommend just doing this one. And once you've completed the course, you'll get a certificate of completion, and you can print that puppy out and put it in your logbook. And now you're ready to fly under Basic Med. Now, they'll go over this a little bit more in the training, but if you happen to have any of these medical conditions right here, you'll have to get a one-time special issuance. And that just basically means that you're going to have a hard time getting medically qualified. And quite frankly, there's a good reason for that. If you're having heart issues or there's a chance you could have a seizure or something in flight, it's probably not a good idea to let you fly without making sure that you're not a risk to others. In addition to that, there are a few mental health issues that will require you to get a one-time special issuance as well. That way we can be sure that you're not putting others at risk. And once again, they'll explain all this stuff in a lot more detail in the course you need to take. But just know that these conditions might keep you out of the sky, or at the very least, they'll delay you from being able to fly. If that's the case, you might consider going after a sport pilot certificate. Under the new Mosaic rule, sport pilots actually have a lot of privileges and can fly without a medical. And I'm actually building a playlist specifically for sport pilots, so if that sounds cool, be sure to subscribe to this channel. Now, there's one more thing I want to mention that should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. When you're operating under Basic Med, and really when you're flying under an actual medical certificate too, there are going to be times when your health might affect your ability to fly. And I'm just going to say this once. Don't be stupid. Please don't fly and or get treated by a doctor. If you have a valid medical, or if you're flying under Basic Med legally and you start to develop health issues and you still go fly, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble if you have an accident and they find out that you weren't actually healthy enough to fly an aircraft. And if you're wondering what regulation they could use to get you in trouble, look no further than the trusty old 9113. No person may operate an aircraft in a careless or reckless manner so as to endanger the life or property of another. And if you're not healthy enough to be out flying, you are endangering the life or property of another. And I know I might sound like a robot when I say this, but consider the I'm safe checklist. If I'm dealing with any of these issues right here, any one of these is a good reason to just ground yourself. It's not worth flying if you're going to be putting yourself or others at risk. Now, before I leave you today, I just want to remind you that if you do decide to operate under Basic Med, don't forget to put that signed CME checklist and your training certificate in your logbook. You have to have those with you if you're going to be operating under Basic Med. Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's video on how to fly without a medical certificate.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button.
In the next video, I'm going to be talking about your privileges and limitations as a pilot. So if that sounds cool, stick around.